This is Carrie Johnson with the Iowa Department of Management, and this webinar is a brief overview of the fiscal 23 budget for the agricultural extension districts in the state. So this will provide you with a little bit of background and a general overview of the budget information and budget forms that you will be using to complete your fiscal year 23 budget for property tax. And what we'll start with is some general budget information. To access the budget information that's applicable to the Ag Extension Districts, we would refer you to the Ag Extension District resource page, is what we typically call it. It's basically just the link that you would go to within our site that has all of the pertinent information for Ag Extension Districts. And here you can also find the tax rates from several years. So it lists for you the past year's tax rates as far as, each ag extension districts, the different components of the rate, the total rate, total value, the total property tax asking, that sort of thing. So it's just information that you might find interesting if you're trying to do some comparisons or look for historical information. The Department of Management's role in the budget process is to provide the forms, including web-based forms. We provide instructions, and we also provide any needed technical assistance for all the local governments that levy tax. What we'll start with is just sort of a general overview of the property tax levies that are available to ag extension districts. The primary fund that you operate under is the Extension Education Fund. The levy limits and taxation limits for this fund depend on the population of your district and whether or not there's been a successful referendum authorizing regular limits to be exceeded. And there is a code section cited here as well. I will say that, to my knowledge, all ag extension districts are currently under a situation where they have had a successful referendum. The maximum tax, so the dollars, include both property tax and utility replacement excise tax. Additionally, if you had a referendum that specified a lower limit than what is shown in the budget instructions, then the lower limit would apply. So you'll find this information also in your budget instructions, but this column here provides for you, depending on your population, what your maximum amount of property tax, so property tax and utility replacement tax, what your maximum requested dollars could be for your fiscal 23 budget. The next property tax levy that is available to you is the Unemployment Compensation Levy. Section 9631 of the Code of Iowa provides that political subdivisions, including, in your case, ag extension districts, can levy a tax to pay for the cost of unemployment benefits. The next levy available for you is the Tort Liability Levy. Chapter 670 authorizes the purchase of a liability insurance policy. The costs, the premium costs of the insurance can be paid from your extension education fund, obviously, or you can levy separately for tort liability if you're not provided with enough levy as needed within the extension education fund. Keep in mind, if you have a package policy, only the tort liability piece of it can be paid from the tort liability levy, and some of the types of coverage that are included could be general liability, auto liability, professional liability, crime bond, that sort of thing. You can also use a levy for the payment of a judgment or settlement within the scope of Chapter 670, and I would recommend, if you are going to consider using this levy and you have not in the past, that you'd want to carefully review that Chapter 670. One thing to note that is a change for this year is regarding the commercial and industrial replacement process. In the 2013 session, of the General Assembly, they passed Senate File 295. It had a variety of different property tax pieces to it, but they also provided a commercial and industrial replacement process. What they put in place at this time was that commercial, industrial, and railroad property would not be taxed on the full 100% of their value. They would instead be taxed on 90% of their value each year. As part of the legislation, then, the state would make replacement claim payments to the county treasurer, which then would be distributed to each levy authority in September and March of each year. So essentially to replace for local governments the potential revenue they lost with the rollback of that value. So that's been in place, as I mentioned, since the legislative session of 2013. Senate File 619 then passed in this past legislative session, in the 2021 session, and basically phased out the state's replacement payments through fiscal year 29. So essentially what the Ag Extension District received for replacement payment in fiscal year 22 is going to be phased out by 1/8 until they receive $0 in fiscal year 30. So just be aware of that. To see an estimation of the revenue to be received, you can use the tool that we've had in the past, but basically what it's going to provide for you is the estimated revenue to be received during the phase out. So it's still going to tell you, this is an estimate of what you could receive, but you're looking at it as the payment is being phased out. So you would select Ag Extension and your appropriate county. And as a reminder, to budget this revenue, you'd budget it under non-tax revenues. The budget deadline is March 15th. That would be the same for the fiscal year 23 budget. So March 15th of 2022 is your deadline. It's important to keep in mind, too, that budgets can be protested. Protesting a local government budget is covered under Code of Iowa 2427. Folks that are impacted by the proposed budget or the expenditure or the taxes can appeal the budget. Basically, they file a petition and appeal with the county auditor. And the number of signatures required on the petition is determined based on the number of people that voted for governor on the last election. So that's a number that would need to be calculated. The deadline for that submission of the protest document is March 25th of each year, so essentially 10 days after your budget deadline. So then they would file that petition with the county auditor. The county auditor would forward the document to the State Appeal Board, and the State Appeal Board, who is a 3-member body of the Director of Department of Management, State Treasurer, and State Auditor, that 3-member body would then work to schedule a local hearing on the matter. Information would be gathered from both sides of the issue, and the State Appeal Board would then render a decision on the appeal. And they can, if deemed appropriate, they can decrease tax asking and expenditures. A budget amendment is an important piece to keep in mind as you think about your budget process. You would amend, of course, your current year that you're in. So if you find during the year that you're operating in that you need an increase in the total expenditures, you would need to pursue a budget amendment. The amendment must be effective before the expenditure amounts are exceeded. So you amend the budget before you spend, essentially. Budget amendments require the same notice and hearing procedures as required for the adoption of the additional budget. So not less than 10, no more than 20 days prior to the date of the budget hearing, you have to give notice. Budget amendments are also subject to protest, and an amendment of a budget that occurs after May 31st, which is then protested, is not going to have enough time probably not going to have enough time for that State Appeal Board to operate a local hearing and render a decision on the protest, so that budget amendment would then be void. The amendment form itself is found by logging into the same online system that you use to adopt your budget, and you pull up that budget that needs amended, so your current year budget, and you select Amend. A webinar on the amendment process is viewable on that Ag Extension District resources page. So you can take a look at that, that webinar. It's pretty brief, but it explains and summarizes the process to amend your budget. You can also amend, you can also access amendment instruction within the online amendment form itself. So we'll dive in now to the online budget system. And for those of you that have used the system in the recent past, you'll find that it's very similar. There's not really any changes you'll see for fiscal year 23. Your login access should transfer from last year if you had access last year. Please let me know if someone needs access that does not have it, or you need to remove someone that currently has access. Just send me an email and we'll get that process going. When you're working in the system, if you use the tab key during data entry, it does move between cells in which you can enter data, and you can also use the arrow keys side to side and up and down as you're entering data. Ending fund balances are produced by subtracting the sum of all expenditures from the sum of beginning balances and revenue. And as you move within a page, the cell that you're in will be highlighted, and the row and column show a green highlight. And I'm just pointing this out to you because that's a way to help you know where you are as you're navigating the online forms. So to get started out, you'd go to that Ag Extension District resource page and you'd select the blue button titled Submit and Amend Budget. You would enter your Enterprise A&A account ID and sign in. And I will take a brief moment to point out that when you log into the system, it's going to tell you which counties have and have not filed value at that point in time. So that way you know when your county has filed value that that information will be populated into your budget form. So again, you log into your budget and you're going to see the following home screen. It's going to have the budget and information to the side. And on the main page of the budget screen, you're going to see your budget forms, whichever ones you have access to. So your current year budget, as well as in this case, the fiscal 21 and of course the fiscal 23 are shown for you. These budgets obviously are completed. If you need to amend your current year budget, as we talked about before, so you're in fiscal 22, you need to amend that budget, you'd select this amend option. But when we're ready just to work on your fiscal year 23 and start entering data, you'd select edit for the fiscal year 23. So once you're inside the budget, you'll see tabs across the top here that represent the different funds. And so you essentially just click on those tabs to open that tab and start entering data. And data entered on these individual sort of supplementary pages will populate onto the summary pages. And within those different fund pages, you'll see two tabs for the funds. You'll see a revenue tab and you'll see an expenditure tab. So you'll complete the revenue tab, enter the revenue applicable to that fund, you'd save it, and then you'd switch over to your expenditure tab and do the same thing. Your tort and tort liability fund looks very similar, has a revenue and an expenditure tab. Same with your unemployment compensation fund, revenue and expenditures. And if you don't have any use for the unemployment levy or the tort liability levy, you can simply ignore those pages. The adopted budget and certification of taxes page is, again, one of those summary pages as we talked about. Anytime there's white cells like this, they're either pulling from different pages or it's a calculated field. So those are not cells that you can enter into. You can only enter into data cells that are blue. So in this case, these cells up here are going to be populated for you from the supplementary pages. The valuations are going to populate for you once your county auditor has filed that value. That will populate for you. You will enter in here your tax request, and it will calculate over here a tax rate for you. The actions you can take when you're inside your budget, of course, you can always check errors, you can save, and we do recommend, of course, you do that often, and you can print at any time. As I said before, valuations are populated for you. Once the 2021 valuations are filed in your county, the fiscal year valuations will be in your budget. That information will be in there for you. Until valuations are filed, though, or if the county auditor unfiles value, you're going to see this notice at the top. You'll see this one right here. And the reason why is to give you a warning that either there's no valuation in there, so you can enter, of course, your expenditures and other sources of revenue, but you can't calculate your property tax rate. Or if it's a situation where, say, it's maybe a couple weeks and your county auditor has filed value, but you're seeing this notification, it's because your county auditor is in there working again and maybe making changes to the value. So just to be aware. Printing and saving the budget, you can print the full budget at any time. Upon proposing your budget, you can also print only the publication notice if you would so choose. If in Google Chrome, which we highly recommend, you can select your local printer, or you can save to PDF. And then, save it off to your desktop, print it later, have that version for you, whatever works for you. Again, supplementary details, you're entering your revenue and expense detail on those detail sheets, and it's going to pull forward for you. You don't need to re-enter the data. If you want to include electronic virtual information on your notice, there is a text box at the bottom of the public hearing tab to add some of this information. Now, I will say the meeting location tab that you're going to enter when you propose your budget is pretty large, so there's a good chance you might be able to fit anything you need to in there. But in case you aren't, or you have quite a bit of information you want to include, you can include it at the bottom of the public hearing tab. Check errors. Of course, you need to check errors before you move forward with your budget. It will tell you if there are errors found and you cannot publish your budget. If you check errors and it's all good, you'll see congratulations, no errors, and you can proceed with proposing and publishing your budget, and in that manner get the notification you need to publish. So you'd select Propose Publish, and you'll get the screen that I mentioned where you enter the date, time, and place for the hearing notice for your regular hearing. Keep in mind you need to give not less than 10, no more than 20 days prior notice prior to the hearing in the newspaper, and you can't count the date of the hearing itself. So you enter your hearing date, hearing time, and then of course the meeting location. As I mentioned, is quite a big box. You might be able to enter everything you need if you have some virtual information, virtual meeting information, but if not, you can use the other location. And then of course you would propose your budget, and that's going to generate a notice you can print or save off to your system. You can also access a public hearing notice at any time after proposing just by going to the print at the top right. So you go to print, here's your print full budget, or you can print just that one page publication notice. Following the public hearing, the council can make any allowable revisions, so they can decrease the tax asking or expenditures. They can never increase above what was published. And then they would, if this would happen to happen, you would go back to the budget and you would do a return to draft, which essentially just opens up the budget for edits. So you'd make your changes, you return to draft, it opens it up, make your changes, save, and then the budget is again proposed and published. Although it's not published in the newspaper again, likely. So you'd leave that original publication date unless for some reason you are actually going to republish and hold another public hearing. After that time, you are ready to adopt. So no revisions needed, you're ready to go. You just click that adopt button and you proceed with the budget as currently presented, and you will enter your adoption date and select adopt. So once your budget is completed, you would file the following documents with the county auditor. You would provide them with the proof of publication for the budget notice, and that way they can make sure that you met that 10 and 20 day requirement for publication. And you'll also provide them with the signed adopted budget and supplementary pages. So you'd gather that information and you would provide it to your county auditor by March 15th to finally file your budget. If you have any questions regarding the budget process or the online system, please feel free to contact me. You can reach me by phone or by email. Thank you.